Hi, I'm Michelle White, sitting in for Sarah Cowgill. Joining me today are Graham Noble, Andrew Moran, Dave Patterson, and Tim Donner. This is the Conservative Five, Liberty Nation's online TV news program. On today's episode, Immigration Nation. President Trump is planning military action in Venezuela, and Maduro has nowhere to go. Trump is looking a lot like Reagan, but will it be the incomparable President Trump who forges his own doctrine that finishes the job of rooting out communism in Latin America? And how does that look to the potential Bush dynasty reboot with past Bush failures displayed on the world stage? We'll explore these options in our segment, Are Maduro's Days Numbered? Fed Up with Immigration is our second segment. We will discuss President Trump's legal ground and political capital in his crackdown on asylum applications, and visas from Afghanistan following the shooting of 2 U.S. Army National Guardsmen just 2 miles from the White House. Minnesota Madness is our third segment today. We will discuss what the federal prosecutor is calling a stacked scheme. Law enforcement is still digging to the bottom of a conspiracy that resulted in the theft of billions of dollars from Minnesota taxpayers. The acting U.S. attorney says it took his breath away. Finally, in our Just for Fun segment, we will bring you fun Christmas traditions and favorites from our panelists. All this and more coming up in this edition of the Conservative Five. The noose is getting ever so tight around the neck of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. With the aircraft carrier USS Gerald Ford off the coast and President Trump closing the airspace, Maduro's options for getting out of Dodge are severely limited. Okay, panel, last week, Cuba warned the United States not to intervene in Venezuela, and Iran on Saturday condemned Trump closing the airspace over Venezuela. Their warnings did not appear to faze President Trump. In fact, it was a bit audacious of them to issue such a cautionary note. Dave, what do you say about the rapidly moving series of events?
Well, I'd say that Maduro's circumstances are growing more dire by the moment. You know, his days are numbered. The Trump administration is applying diplomatic ultimatums, economic sanctions, and military operational posturing, and combined, they're a formidable force. On November 21st, President Trump had a phone call with Maduro, and it lasted about 15 minutes. Reports are that he told Maduro, you can save yourself and those closest to you, but you have to leave the country. And Trump offered him a timeline. Maduro needed to be gone by November 28th. Well, that line in the sand has come and gone. But if Maduro is trying to test President Trump, that tactic has proven to be a bad idea in the past for others. On the military front, the U.S. has conducted 3 months of strikes, as you mentioned. They've killed 83 narco-terrorists and destroyed 20 drug boats. I think it pretty much tells the world Trump means business. You know, I don't see a ground assault, however, on Venezuela happening anytime soon, and it possibly a limited operations, special operations assault on fentanyl or other drug factories. But remember, there is a complicating factor, and that is that there are approximately 25,000 Cuban military advisors in Venezuela, and that makes the wicket a little stickier. Maduro's staff, however, has requested a second phone call. But if there's nothing offered that looks like Maduro stepping down, then I don't think it's going to be any more effective than the first one.
Tim, from a political perspective, doesn't this seem a little like deja vu with a strong American president trying to remove communist regimes in Latin America? And is this the Trump doctrine?
Well, some might say it's pretty similar to the Reagan doctrine. But when you look at Trump, he doesn't fit any of the ordinary descriptions of a president in terms of foreign policy. He's not a hawk. He's not a dove. He's not an isolationist. He is what I would call a foreign policy realist. And he's having some problems with the MAGA base, supposedly, although I think the left is playing this up, with the sense that, wait, you said make America great again. America first. What is he doing with these foreign adventures? Well, I think that it's pretty clear that Venezuela, as a safe haven for murderous drug cartels, is a clear and present danger to the United States and has been for some time. So I think that really Venezuela effectively declared war on the United States, not a war on drugs, but a war with drugs, essentially with impunity, sending untold amounts of fentanyl, which has, we need to remind people, has killed tens of thousands of Americans. Back in 1989, I believe it was, we had a similar situation with Manuel Noriega in Panama. And President George H.W. Bush went right in and took the guy out. Like Dave said, I don't see a land operation anytime soon, but Trump is going to use every other form of pressure he possibly can. I think the way to look at this president's foreign policy is to really compare it to Andrew Jackson. Now, that was 200 years ago, but Jackson believed exactly the same things. He was intent on expanding trade across the world. And he also, when necessary, took military action in retaliation against pirates on the open seas, for example, which we don't have as much anymore, but it was a serious threat to American national interest then. So I think that, Trump, the left is trying to play up that he's going to divide the base by doing a foreign invasion, quote unquote. But like Dave said, I don't think he's going to do that. But he is going to put every form of pressure on Nicolas Maduro, the same way many people think that he should, and probably will soon on Vladimir Putin.
Graham, do you think we are suffering the consequences of President George H.W. Bush not finishing the job of ousting the Sandinistas in Nicaragua? And will Trump's actions in Venezuela dampen or quash the Bush family from trying to reboot their dynasty and control the Republican Party?
Well, I'd start by saying that I do not see any scenario in which the Bush family comes back and becomes the controlling force of the Republican Party. I think their days are well and truly over. I don't know who they'd put up for the job, quite frankly. I mean, Jeb Bush has always,
there's a big difference between Donald Trump and me.
at least in terms of presidential politics, he's always come over as something of a, what was it? Trump used to call him low energy. And, he comes over as very much that. And I don't think the MAGA movement, as it's come to be known, would ever put up with a return of the Bushes. Because I don't think, I think Trump supporters are a different breed altogether than the people who supported the Bush family. And I think those days of the neocons in generally are kind of over and done with. I think there's more neocons in the Democratic Party these days, actually, than there are in the Republican Party.
But if that's the case, then why does Trump always cozy up to Lindsey Graham? And he's always slamming a guy like Rand Paul. Why is that the case? Neocons don't have any influence. Why is that the case then? Please explain to me, Graham, or Dave, for that matter. Mr. Regime.
I'm not sure that's necessarily a kind of a neocon thing. I think that's more me. And don't get me wrong, Andrew. I'm with you on that. My view is, what is the deal? What is his love affair with Lindsey Graham, who's barely trustworthy, at the best of times. I don't know. I think he just. I think it's kind of a political tactic that he keeps Lindsey Graham close, because I believe that he thinks Lindsey Graham has the power to do some moving and shaking in the background on his behalf. I guess that's why it is.
Yes,
so
I think
he almost uses Lindsey Graham as a useful tool.
He understands that Lindsey Graham has tremendous influence in the Republican caucus in the United States Senate. And he feels like, I think that Lindsey Graham has the pulse of congressional Republicans or Senate Republicans, and he's a deal maker, and he's a guy who's effective at that. So I think it's really more a tactical thing than an ideological thing.
Yep.
And Tim, I've never actually seen Lindsey Graham as a neocon. I mean, he goes with the flow when it's necessary and kind of is an obstructionist when he thinks it is useful to him. But I see him as a Trump supporter, and he's going to back Trump in most cases.
Graham, let's get back to that first question because I want you to have the final word on that. Are we suffering the consequences of George H.W. Bush not finishing the job? Is that what we're seeing now?
Well, I think it all comes down to, I'm not sure if I would say that entirely, but of course, we've always had this problem, or the United States has always had this problem with certain South and Central American countries flirting with Marxism, socialism, whatever you want to call it, and having these little people's revolutionary moments. And of course, the danger for that beyond those groups, because none of those countries are ever posing a serious threat to the United States. But then if they're flirting with these kind of left-wing extremist policies, then they're opening the door to adversaries such as Russia and China to kind of jump in there and cozy up to them. And that presents a threat to us. I mean, the country of El Salvador or Nicaragua or Honduras, any of these countries, and Venezuela as well, do not present any threat to America except
for the drugs
as conduits for more powerful adversaries overseas to use them to get to us. Yeah, there's certainly a kind of a continuing theme that's been running for decades through Central America and South America.
I would add one more thing, Michelle, which is I think what Trump is doing here. We talked about Andrew Jackson and the similarities to the Jackson foreign policy, but what he's doing is he's reapplying the old Monroe Doctrine set forth by James Monroe, early president, which said that the United States should essentially control things in its hemisphere and keep people from the other hemisphere from having substantial influence. And we know that China is increasingly involved in Latin America and South America, and Trump is, in the long run, out to diminish Chinese influence in the region.
Right. And while you're talking about Jackson was fighting the Barbary Pirates. So all of this hoopla over Trump's attacking drug boats in the Caribbean, there is precedent for that as well.
They weren't pirates. They were just innocent fishermen.
Andrew, I want to get to you from an economic perspective. If the socialist regime is replaced with a more open society, an open economy, how long do you think before we can right the Venezuelan ship, and particularly for the oil industry?
Well, years ago, I interviewed an economist named Robert Wenzel. He's dead, but I interviewed him for Swaponomics TV during the pandemic. And actually, I posed that question to him, or I'm not sure I posed on his blog. But anyway, he said that if you remove socialist price controls in Venezuela, you would essentially alleviate many of the problems almost immediately in Venezuela. I've reported on the trials and tribulations of Venezuela for so many years, and it's the same socialist dogma that has plagued other countries that have flirted with socialism. Now, on the issue of oil, you have to look back to the pre-Chavez years. Venezuela is sitting on the world's largest oil reserves. It was one of the wealthiest countries in Latin America up until the 1980s, maybe 1990s. And, when oil collapsed, the rest of Venezuela collapsed too. But that wasn't because of you needed socialism. It was because of government mismanagement. Because when the country relied about 90% of oil exports at the time, then when oil prices collapsed, then it didn't generate enough revenue. So what the Venezuelan government did is that it started borrowing more money because the economic growth was declining, and because of that, that was a start of the rise of people like Hugo Chavez and other socialist leaders. Now, I would say one last thing when it comes to, free market economics in places like Venezuela, I always refer to Milton Friedman here. And he said that capitalism doesn't create a free country, but rather free countries have capitalism. And since we mentioned Jeb Bush earlier, I would say, please clap.
Like golf clap.
Well, one thing is for sure, Americans are not in favor of boots on the ground in Venezuela, but they are tired of the fentanyl crisis, and that's the bottom line. Maduro appears to be cornered, and we might rightly wonder whether he'll be taking up space in prison sometime soon. The ambush shooting of 2 American soldiers on American soil that killed Army National Guard Sarah Bergstrom and left her partner, Andrew Wolf, fighting for his life has shocked the nation. President Trump reacted by closing down immigration from third world countries. He's also acted swiftly to pause asylum applications and all visas for Afghan nationals. Trump posted on Truth Social the Immigration and Nationality Act, Section 212F, which says, whenever the president finds that the entry of any aliens or any class of aliens into the United States would be detrimental to the interests of the United States, he may, by proclamation, and for such period as he shall deem necessary, suspend the entry of all aliens or any class of aliens as immigrants or non-immigrants, or impose on the entry of aliens any restrictions he may deem to be appropriate. Let's bring in our panel now. Dave, is this law bulletproof from the leftist lunatics who will likely sue and the leftist activist judges who have blocked many of Trump's orders?
Well, I think the question is, can President Trump rely on the Immigration and Nationality Act, as you've stated, to halt or significantly curtail immigration from designated non-Western countries? The short answer is yes. Yes, he can. Trump has relied on 212F for these actions as it provides, a pretty sweeping plenary power over entry decisions. And not only that, but the Supreme Court, and this is not my field, but I can read the Supreme Court in Trump versus Hawaii, which deferred to the executive and particularly when it comes to national security judgments, unless it's clearly unconstitutional. National security basically outweighs anything else, and the court set a very low bar. The proclamations need only to be on the surface legitimate. Rationale like vetting deficiencies suffice. And to survive scrutiny, is particularly these kinds of low bar actions are enough. Right now, Trump's proclamation impacts 19 countries with 36 more under review. And currently, the visa and entry suspensions blocked 34,000 visas and 120,000 non-immigrant visas annually for the impacted countries, of which Afghanistan is certainly one.
Right. Graham, how much political capital does the president have now that the U.S. has suffered one attack on 2 military members and one planned attack in Fort Worth, also by an Islamist Afghan national?
Well, when you talk about political capital, we seem to be almost kind of evolved into a new political era where political capital is kind of an ethereal thing, because when you're dealing with Democrats, today's Democrats, they don't play by those rules anymore. You can't have political capital to use against Democrats because they will simply willfully ignore anything that has gone before, and it doesn't, like, they don't have any shame. We could have a terrorist attack in this country just about every single day, carried out by an immigrant who came here from, Afghanistan or Somalia or whatever, wasn't vetted. And we could have these kind of attacks every day on just ordinary American citizens or on federal agents or whatever. And the Democrats apparently would just continue to ignore it and say, well, but still you're removing these poor immigrants who came here just for a better life. So the whole political capital thing kind of doesn't really work anymore when you're dealing with that kind of opposition, with that kind of mentality. If we kind of flashed back to, 20 years ago, 20, 30 years ago, then yes, he would have enormous capital over this. I mean, it's getting harder and harder for Democrats, even as shameless as they are, for them to continue to object to Trump's immigration policies when we clearly have a situation where we have got who knows how many people in this country who either were invited in or just came in illegally, and either way were not vetted and they're not in this country. They don't, they're not here with good intent. They're not here just to make a better life for themselves and their families. They're here to do us harm. And we don't know how many there are. And I think at least the good thing is that the majority of Americans, and I would say the majority of even people who vote Democrat, have now gotten to the point where they kind of realize we are in danger here from all of these people who came here. We don't know who they are. And so yeah, this shooting, and then the other, attempted or planned attack in Texas, definitely they at least give Trump more. I hate to use this word in this context, but ammunition, figuratively speaking, it gives him more ammunition to use against the Democrats' objections.
Right, I agree. So it should be a bipartisan issue, but it's not. Tim, I want to play a clip of Caroline Leavitt speaking to the press yesterday on this issue and get your analysis on the other side.
What's the status of all these other people?
They're essentially paused for review. And the Department of Homeland Security is taking this very seriously because we are not going to allow soldiers like we saw in American streets last week to be gunned down at the hands of these foreign nationals who have the privilege of coming to the United States of America. And unfortunately, this is not the only example of a dangerous Afghan who was let in by Joe Biden, who went on to harm the American people.
Leavitt went on to list several Afghan nationals with intent to harm Americans, one who shot and wounded two Fairfax, Virginia police officers during a routine traffic stop, who then said he should have served with the Taliban before he was killed by return fire. Leavitt reported two other Afghan nationals who had pledged their allegiance to ISIS were granted legal status by the Biden administration and were prosecuted for plotting a terrorist attack just before Election Day last year in Oklahoma. And even more egregious, Leavitt reported an Afghan national who was on the terror watch list was released into the country by the Biden administration after he was apprehended by border control. Tim, could President Trump use the Immigration and Nationality Act to permanently ban Islamists from entering our country? Could that be considered politically toxic? And if we don't prohibit their entrance into the U.S., then how do we prevent an Islamist takeover like what we see happening in France and the UK?
Well, when you say permanent, that's basically 3 years plus, because if we get a Democratic president, they'll certainly reverse that. But this takes us back to the days of the Muslim ban that Trump proposed during his first term, and he set off all kinds of alarm bells on the left because he was willing essentially to call a spade and say that the biggest problem we have here in terms of foreigners is terrorism, specifically Islamist terrorism. Let's be clear, it's going to take all of Trump's term and well beyond that to overcome what the Biden administration did in terms of letting people come into this country. And it all stems back. Of course, the border, conservatively, 10 million people crossed without any vetting. And so many of them are still in the midst of our communities. Trump is trying to get rid of them. And of course, the left is apoplectic that he's trying to clean up the mess that Joe Biden created. But, we've had large pauses in immigration before. You remember in the late 19th and early 20th century, we had massive numbers of Italians Irish, Jews, and others who migrated to the United States. Once the mid-1920s came around, suddenly they tightened the restrictions because the sense was that we had sort of hit a point of diminishing returns, shall we say, by allowing immigrants into the country. That pause lasted for 40 years. So it's very possible, especially in terms of constitutionally, I think people would be surprised to know the extent of the power that the chief executive has to limit immigration. As you mentioned it earlier, it's a virtually absolute power. But, this is a tip of the iceberg, and it's all because of the dramatic exit from Afghanistan, which was nothing short of a disaster. We know 13 people were killed at Abbey Gate as the Biden administration seemed not to know what the hell to do to fulfill a promise to get us out of Afghanistan. Some would say only Joe Biden could ruin something as popular as withdrawing from the war in Afghanistan, but he did. And we saw the images of people hanging onto the plane as it left Kabul. And it reminded people of the flight from Saigon in 1975 during the Ford administration. If the withdrawal from Afghanistan had been handled correctly, just competently, it seems to me we would not have these problems now. A lot of these Afghans did help us in our efforts to secure some stability in Afghanistan, and we welcome that. But that doesn't mean that they are people who favor a constitutional republic or are used to any form of democracy. I'll remind you that in 1979, when the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, a country that no one's been able to conquer since the days of Genghis Khan because of its mountainous terrain, one of our allies in trying to take down the Soviets was Osama bin Laden. Now, that didn't mean that Osama bin Laden was a constitutionalist. It just meant that he was opposed to any foreign occupation of Afghanistan, and you saw what he was able to do on September 11th. So let's not confuse foreigners who are willing to help us in a time of war or instability with people who will necessarily be assets to the United States if we bring them here.
Right. And they were paid for their help for the United States. So there's always that as a motivation. Andrew, the left likes to spin illegal immigration to say that they take jobs that Americans don't want. What do illegal immigrants, and particularly hostile immigrants, cost the United States, not only in dollars, but public safety and criminal trials and incarceration for the lives some of them have taken, and national security?
Sorry, Michelle, I always do this to Sarah, but I just want to tackle a couple of points before I answer your question. One is that all of this whole immigration issue, it connects to three issues. Sorry, Dave, I'm going to complain about regime change wars. That contributes to this problem. The open border policy of the previous administration, that contributes to the problem. And also the replacement level. Tim's talking about Calvin Coolidge's policies, mid-1920s. People were having children back then. Today, we are not having children. Therefore, we're depending on immigrants. Now, excuse me, to answer your question, Miss White, the common study that people refer to shows that the net annual fiscal cost of legal immigration is about $150 billion. This includes all the things you were talking about: law enforcement, shelters, education, etc. I remember Jerry Nadler last year, he was in Congress and he was saying how we need illegal immigrants to pick up rotting produce. Now, the problem with that is that if you look at this year's Bureau of Labor Statistics employment data, I wrote about this for LibertyNation.com. If you look at all the numbers, all the new jobs that have been added, they've gone to American citizens. U.S.-born individuals are getting all these jobs. And foreign-born people, particularly illegals, they're not getting any jobs at all. And what are the jobs that Americans are getting? They're getting the very jobs that leftists say that they won't take, that illegals have to do. We're talking about warehousing, we're talking about construction, we're talking about leisure and hospitality. So it's still early, of course, in Trump's immigration agenda and his economic agenda, but the numbers are showing that Americans are doing the very jobs that many people said they wouldn't do. So I just want to find very fascinating. I mean, yes, the U.S. government data has been delayed because of the shutdown, but from January to September, you're seeing that U.S.-born individuals are working and getting the jobs.
Immigration was Trump's signature campaign issue and the top issue for many of the nearly 80 million Americans who elected him. As more violent attacks happen to Americans at the hands of illegal or hostile immigrants, Trump appears ready to tamp down the violence as best he can. On top of the Islamist violence we've seen from immigrants, President Trump has shone a light on the scale of a scheme by Somali Muslim immigrants who allegedly siphoned billions of Minnesota taxpayers' dollars from food and autism programs, sending it to Kenya and Somalia. Last week, officials reportedly told Congress some of that money landed in the hands of the al-Qaeda-linked terrorist group Al-Shabaab. Tim, the Minnesota Department of Human Services employees posted a long statement on X that said, in part, this is a cascade of systemic failures leading up to Tim Walz. Agency leaders appointed by Tim Walz willfully disregarded rules and laws to keep fraud reports quiet, even to the extent of threatening families of whistleblowers. What do you expect the consequences will be for Walz and his department heads? And how will this case affect Minnesota's 2026 elections, Walz's re-election campaign, especially with a Republican challenger? Kristen Robbins has made fraud prevention the focus of her campaign.
Well, I think the first effect is if Tim Walz, as he seemed to, had ambitions to run for president in 2028, I think that's effectively over. I think it's a serious question as to whether he can continue on for a third term as governor of Minnesota. That's very unusual. Most governors in Virginia, is the one state where you're limited to one term. And many states, you're limited to 2 terms, but not Minnesota. He intends to run again. But you know what? Every time that Tim Walz has opened his mouth, he's got himself in trouble. And I think that there's many Democrats who are still shaking their heads at the fact that he was picked to run with Kamala Harris because he became an embarrassment with embellishments and outright lies about his background and his resume. You recall him rooting against Tesla, where he had a public forum where he said he was celebrating because the price of Tesla stock was going down back during the big Elon Musk controversy, not even realizing that a lot of his state funds were invested in Tesla. So that was a ridiculous thing. He called, the members of ICE who were raiding communities to pluck out criminal aliens. He called them the Gestapo. Mm-hmm. So, you use language like this and you think you're going to get the left all excited. But in fact, it has had the opposite effect. I think Tim Walz is someone that most Democrats would say, please just leave and don't come back.
Right.
Waltz out the door.
Ooh.
That was good, Andrew. Graham, do you think these indictments will strengthen Trump's position against the pushback he's received from Democrats over immigration enforcement?
Well, it kind of it almost comes back to the question you asked me in another segment on this episode about political capital. Does he gain any political capital from these multiple indictments in Minnesota? I believe the feds are saying now they've indicted almost 60 people. But I also believe that if you combine that with the number of people who've been charged at the state level in various fraud schemes, almost all stemming from pandemic era aid programs and various other kind of subsidies. The total number is, I think, close to 90 people. The overwhelming majority of them are of Somali origin. It's kind of funny because Democrats currently are saying, well, you can't paint the whole Somali community with a brush of being criminals just because some of them have been, involved in these fraudulent schemes. And I feel, in my head, I think, okay, all right, now do guns. Now apply that to gun violence, please.
Right.
But because the Democrats love to generalize when it suits them, but not when it doesn't. But anyway, so yeah, I mean, I think this puts Trump in a great position when he's trying to go after these illegal immigrants, legal aliens in Minnesota, because he can actually say, look, you can't tell me I'm just, we're just snatching people off the street whose only crime was to come here to make a better lives for themselves. I mean, these people are actually stealing up to $1 billion of taxpayers' money in Minnesota, and so you've got that. That's a much bigger crime than just the civil offense of illegally entering the country. Now you've got actual fraud and massive embezzlement and all kinds of money laundering, and then of course you throw in the Al-Shabaab factor, right, which is a Sunni Muslim terror group based in Somalia, and now that there's a report saying that it's possible that untold amounts of money is being funneled to this group. So now you've got all of these much more, you've got these legitimate reasons so far, some very important legitimate reasons why, in fact, we should be taking a very close look at the Somali community there for what's going on. So, yeah, I think that the indictments certainly help. That many indictments certainly puts Trump in a good position. And, of course, even the Attorney General of Minnesota is actually kind of angry now because they actually got one guy. I don't know if he was a Somali or not. He had a very kind of I want to say an Arabic name, Yusuf somebody or other. Him and his wife were actually found guilty by a jury on 6 counts of fraudulently obtaining money through a business they set up, and actually a white female progressive judge in Minnesota threw out the conviction. And so even the Minnesota Attorney General now, who is no friend of Trump's, is now very upset about that. And people and American-born people in Minnesota are currently up in arms. They're saying, what on earth is going on in our state? So I think Trump's in a very good position to bring a quick answer to your question.
There's a couple of other things at play here that we should mention. The first one is that this scandal was already brewing when Tim Walz was selected to be the vice presidential candidate for Kamala Harris. And the media, surprise, surprise, basically brushed it over, didn't give any coverage of what we now see as a massive scandal. And so it was overlooked. I didn't even see the conservative press talking much about it. So that's one thing. And the other thing that is even more disturbing in my mind is that the whistleblowers who were outing the people who were perpetrating this fraud, they were intimidated and threatened by the Walz administration and told to remain silent or else. So, I mean, this scandal runs so deep, I still think it's possible that Tim Walz will have to resign as governor of Minnesota. And if not, he probably will be advised not to run for re-election.
The Walz administration, when addressing this issue of this massive fraud that's going on, pretty much came out and made the admission that the reason why these Somalis who set up all these businesses and then funneled all this COVID money, pretending that they were feeding children and treating autism and all this kind of stuff, and they weren't doing any of it. They were just pocketing the money and buying fancy houses and cars and stuff. And the Wars administration said, well, we think that the reason why this was allowed to go on as long as it did was because officials in Minnesota were afraid of alienating the Somali community. So it was literally, they were saying, yeah, you go on, you carry on stealing the money because we don't want to upset you.
We don't want to be seen as racist. That's exactly what it is, because Somalis are black. And Tim Walz cannot, or members of his administration can't stomach themselves the idea that you could be highly critical of a black community and a foreign community, because that would cause a lot of problems on their side. Wait a minute, you're taking Trump's side. You're targeting these innocent Somalis who are here just to make a better life, as we've discussed.
It'll be interesting to see if anybody's charged in administration for targeting those whistleblowers and threatening them. But I want to give Andrew a bit to respond. Andrew, how long do you think it will take the state to recover from the economic loss from this alleged large-scale fraud?
Well, probably not. I don't think it's much of an impact on Minnesota's economy. I think, because not people know this, but Minnesota's GDP, it rivals that of, Argentina and Belgium and Thailand. So $1 billion out of, an economy that's only $600 billion, it's a drop in the buck. Now, there could be policy consequences. It could harm Somali businesses in the short term. But I think it's more of an indictment just how incompetent government is. Government-run programs, especially during the pandemic, they were just rife with fraud. Bureaucrats were so incompetent; they just handed out money left, right, and center. I may perturb some people here, Dave Patterson, but my question is, and I'd be facetious here, but isn't just an extension of funding for Al Qaeda, which is now, it's an ally of the United States. We support already Al Qaeda, used to be an enemy, and now we're saying taxpayer dollars to Al Qaeda in forms of weapons and personnel and all this stuff. So perhaps just an extension. This welfare fraud was an extension of America's foreign policy. Dave can comment anytime he wants, if you like.
I do want to hear your response.
Dave wants regime change in Minnesota,
right.
I think.
Yes. Well, I think that Andrew's talking about the new Syrian president, and it was back in his formative years that he was associated with Al Qaeda. I don't think that that's the case today, and it can't be the case, quite frankly, for him to stay in office as president. But the larger issue here is something I wrote about 4 or 5 years ago, and that is what we've allowed to happen is multiculturalism. Mm-hmm. And what that means is we've allowed to have particularly ethnic groups consolidate in cantonments, where if you have an opportunity to become a ISIS proponent, well, you're among friends, and that can take place. If you're looking to have terrorist inclinations, then you're surrounded by people who are influenced that way, as opposed to having assimilation, where new immigrants are assimilated throughout the country, and these concentrations of individuals who can very easily become of a single mind are encouraged. And you have the Somalis in Minneapolis, the Arab community in Dearborn, Michigan. There's a town in Texas that attempted to get the governor to agree to having Sharia law in their town to supplant normal law enforcement. If it's possible to eliminate this inclination from immigrants coming into the United States, we should do everything to encourage assimilation and not multiculturalism.
And encourage the native population, Americans, to have more children. I talked about this in the previous segment. Have to have a higher replacement level, otherwise you're going to keep depending on people from Somalia and all the people who have children, which typically be of Arab descent.
Right.
And most of them, the ones you referred to, Andrew, are basically reproducing at double the rate of Americans. So you can do the math very quickly and you understand that what's happened in England and other places in Europe could easily become the case here because we're at 1.8 children per couple now, which is below the 2.0 replacement rate that we need to maintain the native, population in the United States.
Dave raises a great point about multiculturalism, because when the left talks about multiculturalism, they like to pretend that means people from all different cultures coming in and becoming part of our society and making it richer and more diverse and colorful, and it's all puppies and rainbows. But actually the whole Western hemisphere, because this is Europe as well, and Canada, I'm sure, is the same. The United States, their version of multiculturalism actually is that you bring all these people in from these different cultures, but when they get into your country, they form their own communities, their own insular communities. Their cantonments, as Dave put it. Without the assimilation, multiculturalism minus assimilation can only be destructive. If you want true multiculturalism, then you want people to assimilate and adopt the values and the traditions of the country to which they are moving. But if they're not doing that, if they're keeping their own culture and their own traditions and their own values and their own religions all in their little communities, excluding the native population of the country they've moved to, then that's never a good thing for anybody.
Well, I think this puts a lot to the notion that diversity itself should be the goal of American culture, because the left tells us constantly diversity is what makes us strong. But on the right, the statement is basically unity is what makes us strong. And unity and diversity, unfortunately,
pluribus unum.
Yes, out of many one, or as Al Gore said, out of one many. But he botched it during the 2000 campaign. But unity and diversity are unfortunately at odds with each other. And I think we've learned that exactly what Graham said, the ghettoizing of culture. You just see it naturally. People cleave to others who are like them. And, you could see it just in you want to go to a lunchroom at a college or a high school, you're likely to see the black kids sitting together, the white kids sitting together, the Asian kids sitting together. That's human nature. And if we're going to be a melting pot rather than a mosaic, we have to embrace unity over diversity.
I think it's going to come down to just a full court press at educating those who are coming into the country that what you're here to find is the American dream, not the isolated Somali dream, not the isolated Afghan dream, not the isolated pick your favorite country dream, but the American dream. And that comes with some responsibilities to assimilate.
Right. Dave, I want to ask you one more question while we're on the topic of immigration. Should Trump ban immigration from war-torn countries? Do you see a relationship between war and greed, as in the Minnesota madness we're talking about?
Yeah, I think so. I think that as a short-term stopgap measure until things become different, I think that's a perfectly legitimate approach to not bringing in other people's problems so they can be your problems.
The federal prosecutor reportedly said the stacked schemes took his breath away, and law enforcement reportedly says they aren't even close to halfway understanding the scale of this fraud. We'll be watching to see if the bureaucrat gatekeepers and watchdogs will be held responsible for their failure to stop this fraud. Thanks, panel. Now for a little fun to remind our audience that conservatives, unlike their Democratic counterparts, still like a good laugh or two from time to time. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, it's that moment you've all been waiting for. C5 presents a segment we call Just for Fun. Today's topic will, of course, be Christmas. So panelists, pick a number 1 through 5. I'll read you a question, and you can answer it to the best of your ability until one of us interrupts you to tell you just how wrong you are. Ready?
Ready.
I'm never ready.
Andrew, I'll start with you then.
Oh,
That's a good move.
I'll go number 5.
Number 5. What is one favorite Christmas tradition you feel comfortable sharing with our audience?
And please don't say eating sushi.
Well, actually, I love eating sushi on Christmas Eve.
I knew it.
Do we eat anything else, Andrew? Or is it just sushi?
Well, on Christmas Day, I'll stand there when the kids are opening their presents. And I stand there with my Grinch fingers nervously drumming and counting all the money that was spent. And then I hear the noise, oh, the noise. And then I say, I must find a way to stop Christmas from coming next year.
Okay,
He's the only one I know. Andrew's the only one I know who embraces the role of Grinch. He lives for it. He eats and breathes it.
Tim, what's your number?
I'll take 2.
2. When do you put up your Christmas tree, and how do you like to decorate it? Do you have a particular theme?
Well, I tell you, I wasn't going to admit this over the last couple of years, but we have a neighbor who we call Woodman. He likes to chop trees, chop wood, and all of this. And even he and his family went to a fake Christmas tree. So that sort of gave me the permission concept. So now we're going to be in our 3rd year of using an artificial Christmas tree. You know, for us, essentially, though this year we were away, we would do it the day after Thanksgiving, do it on the Friday after Thanksgiving, because anything before that is just plain too early, and there probably ought to be a constitutional amendment banning it. And anything much later, I don't understand the people that put it up like on Christmas Eve, because you put all this work into making it look good for one day. No. For all the effort that we put in, I want more than 1 day's of use out of our artificial Christmas tree.
If you watch,
Tim, I would argue there should be a constitutional amendment against artificial Christmas trees for several reasons. Most importantly of which, we're importing those from China. So we'll just leave that one. But I'm all about the smell, the sound, and the beauty of it. And you can't have that with an artificial one. But
I would say, if you watch all the old movies in the 1930s, 1940s, a lot of the households, they put up their Christmas trees on Christmas Eve, and then they take it down on Boxing Day. And that, in my opinion, is the best. I can't stand Christmas trees. My cat always eats it and throws up the leaves. And, you know, our fake tree, I will say. But he always eats it and throws it up and make all this mess everywhere. But this idea of putting up on December 1st, that was unheard of 100 years ago. Cool.
you would put it up and then leave it up till January 6th, which is what we used to call on the East Coast Little Christmas. I think that's the Eastern Orthodox.
Yes, Eastern Orthodox. They never kind of got them. They never got the memo that we've changed calendars, you know.
Right. So we would keep ours up from, at least until the 6th. Graham.
Well, I give Andrew a lot of credit for consistency here. Since he embraces the role of Grinch, of course he's going to hate Christmas tree.
Right. He's not. He's really very, very loving. Okay, Graham, you have 1 or 3. Which one?
3.
Oh, I want number 1. I want Graham down for number 1.
How do you mentally prepare yourself for the eventual argument with family members at Christmas who may have TDS?
Well, that wasn't the question to ask me, actually, simply because I don't deal with family at all at Christmas. I don't do anything actually. Funny enough, my wife this year, normally at least once a year, my wife and I try to get up to North Carolina to see her children and grandchildren that have kind of become family to me as well. Obviously, we've been together a long time, and her grandchildren are too young to delve into politics. They're only just at the age where they're getting to choose which genders they are. But her son and her daughter are both I don't know whether or not I'd call them hardcore Trump supporters, but they are both definitely on the political right. So there is nobody, I have no known family members that suffer from TDS, which I consider myself fortunate.
That's wonderful.
I mean, as to how I mentally prepare for Christmas in general, I would say bourbon, THC gums, and just lots of loud music.
That's of loud music. That's so sad, Graham.
That is a formula for success.
I'm just not, to be honest, I'm really just not a person who celebrates any holidays at all. I don't have any kind of religious or moral objection to any of it. I just don't. I don't celebrate my own birthday. I don't celebrate Christmas. I don't celebrate Thanksgiving. Just don't do the whole holiday thing, really.
But you do celebrate Guy Fawkes Day. I know that for a fact.
Yes.
Okay, Dave, you get the best question. What's your favorite Christmas movie?
Well, I have two of them, actually. And it's not particularly unique. I like White Christmas and A Christmas Story. The Christmas Story is my story. It's exactly how I grew up, with the exception we didn't go out at Christmas Eve for Chinese food.
Right.
But what I wanted the most was a Red Ryder BB gun. And I got it. I got a Red Ryder Golden Eagle BB gun for Christmas, and I was delighted, and I did not shoot my eye out.
Oh, well, that's good.
But that's a ridiculous answer. Everybody knows that the best Christmas movie of all time is Chevy Chase's Christmas Vacation.
I knew this was coming.
It's without parallel. I mean,
I thought you were going to say Die Hard.
Yeah. Oh, here we go. We're going to have the Die Hard debate again. Okay, let's pin Michelle down on this. Michelle, is Die Hard a Christmas movie or not?
Absolutely not. No.
Oh, listen to that. We could have, maybe on the next one, we'll have a whole segment just on whether it is or isn't.
Maybe that will be our next Just for Fun segment of the arguments for and against. But
it raises the forever question: just because a movie comes out at Christmas time, is it a Christmas movie? And I would have to say no.
Well, there's a great 1961 noir movie called Blast of Silence, and it's about a lonely gangster who goes to New York City at Christmas time to kill a small time mob boss. And this guy's lonely, and he's looking at Christmas trees and families, and he thinks about his old girlfriend. And that's a good Christmas movie. It's a nice black and white, gritty movie to enjoy the family at the fire.
Dave, the thing about the movie White Christmas is the great majority of the movie has nothing to do with Christmas.
I know.
I remember I was watching the movie with my wife, and I said, when do we get to the Christmas part? I mean, most of it is not actually about Christmas. The only Christmas part is when they sing "I'm Dreaming of a White Christmas."
Well, you have to realize that this is taken at Christmas time, that the entire thematic behind it is Christmas, and they're doing all of this wonderful stuff for the retired general. What do you do with a retired general at Christmas time? And so I think that you can make a case that it is a Christmas story, but Christmas in Connecticut is another one of my favorites.
Barbara Stanwyck cannot do comedy movies. You can't. She can never do it. She was terrible at that movie. Her whole thing is just being confused. That's her style of comedy. She was a great actress, one of the best, but not in comedies.
I think any movie that you can snuggle up with the family and enjoy the music, the dancing, which is why White Christmas fits this, the music, the dancing, the singing, but also have the Christmas theme is a good Christmas movie. Die Hard does not fit that description. I'm sorry. I'm sure I've made a few enemies here.
But didn't it all happen during a Christmas party?
Yes, it did.
It did, but it's an adventure movie and it's not a feel-good family movie and it has nothing to do with Christmas. So that's my
I heard that the Willis family, actually, their tradition is to watch that movie every Christmas. So I think that...
Oh, the Willis family?
Well, that settles the issue then, Michelle. We're wrong.
Right. So therefore, we should take that as an example. Okay. Thank you, guys. That's it for our Conservative 5 panel today. Check out our other C5 shows and segments on your favorite video platform. YouTube, Vimeo, Rumble, we're on all of them. As well as Liberty Nation News has its own Roku channel, where you can see all of our TV productions. Stop by and see our new aggregate polling operation, The Public Square. I'm your host, Michelle White, sitting in for Sarah Cowgill. Thank you for joining us today. Get your fix of free thinking and free speech at libertynation.com.